July 7, 1968. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 3 seconds. Wells Restaurant, Harlem, New York. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 5 seconds. 12:45 p.m. Bumpy Johnson collapsed face first into his plate of chicken and hominy grits. One moment he was laughing with his childhood friend, Junie Bird, reminiscing about the old days. The next, he clutched his chest, his face twisted in pain. Congestive heart, failure massive and instantaneous. He was 62 years old. The Godfather of Harlem, the man who had survived gang wars with Dutch Schultz, Alcatraz, and decades of street violence, died surrounded by breakfast and friends, not enemies and bullets. As his wife later said, it was the way any Harlem sporting man would pray to go. But for Mayme Johnson, 53, married to Bumpy for 20 years. It was the start of a 41-year journey. As a widow, a journey she would walk alone. Mayme Johnson never loved another man, never remarried, never even dated. For 41 years, until her death in 2009. She remained Mrs. Bumpy Johnson, devoted, loyal, alone. This is the story of what happened to Bumpy Johnson's family after his death. How Mayme preserved his legacy while battling Hollywood's lies. How both of Bumpy's daughters struggled and died young. How his wealth, estimated at $50 million, equivalent to $440 million, today was distributed. How his granddaughter carried the family name into the 21st century. And how his great-grandson, living in London, represents the last direct link to the Godfather of Harlem. Mayme was born in 1914 in North Carolina. She moved to New York City in 1938 during the Great Migration, when thousands of black families fled the Jim Crow South for better opportunities in the North. She found work as a waitress at a nightclub owned by singer and actress Ethel Waters. It was respectable work, with good tips and a chance to meet interesting people. On an April evening in 1948, one of those interesting people walked in, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. He was 42, she was 33. He was already the most powerful gangster in Harlem. She was a waitress with dreams of something more. Before long, she was known as Bumpy's Girl, Mayme later wrote in her memoir. It was a good title to possess. It meant she could get in anywhere she wanted and was treated like a queen wherever she went, showered with gifts and jewelry on a steady basis. 6 months later, in October 1948, they were married in a civil ceremony. We were driving past 116th and St. Nicholas Avenue in his Cadillac when he suddenly turned to me and said, "Meh, I think you and I should go ahead and get married," Mayme recalled. She was stunned but composed. "Is that right?" she asked. "Yes, that's right," he replied, continuing to drive. 2 weeks later, they were married. That was Bumpy, direct, no nonsense. When he made a decision, he acted. Mayme, practical, intelligent, and fiercely loyal, was the perfect partner for a man like him. Their marriage lasted 20 years, from 1948 to 1968. But Bumpy was incarcerated for 11 of those years. From 1952 to 1963, he served a 15-year sentence for narcotics conspiracy at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. Mayme visited him, wrote letters, managed their affairs, and kept the home ready for his return. She could have left, divorced, or found someone else. She didn't. "I married him for better or worse," Mayme said years later, and I meant it. When Bumpy was released on parole in 1963, he returned home to 5 more years together. 5 years of relative peace and building a life. Then, on July 7, 1968, it ended. Mayme wasn't with him when he died. They had watched the Lawrence Welk show together the night before normal evening. Bumpy went to bed around 11 p.m. the next morning. He told Mayme he was going to Wells Restaurant to meet. Bumpy Johnson went to Wells Restaurant for breakfast with Junie Bird. It was a routine, something they did often. "Be back for lunch," I said. "Always," Bumpy replied. But he never returned. Around 1 p.m., Junie Bird ran to their house, out of breath and panicked. Mayme knew before he spoke. "He's gone, isn't he?" she asked. Junie nodded, tears streaming down his face. Bumpy had collapsed at Wells Restaurant, massive heart attack. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was already dead. Mayme collapsed, screaming. Neighbors heard her from 3 blocks away. The Godfather of Harlem was gone, and her world had ended. Bumpy Johnson's funeral was held on July 11, 1968, at the Unity Funeral Chapel in Harlem. Over 1,000 people attended, the line stretching around the block. Politicians, criminals, businessmen, and neighborhood residents who Bumpy had helped over the years came to pay their respects. Mayme sat in the front row, dressed in black and veiled, silent. She didn't cry during the service. She had already cried herself empty in the 4 days since Bumpy's death. She simply stared at the casket, unable to believe that the man she loved, the man who had seemed indestructible, was truly gone. After the funeral, once everyone left, Mayme returned to their apartment at 2 West 120th Street. For the first time in 20 years, she was alone, the widow who would never move on. People expected her to remarry. She was only 53, still beautiful, intelligent, and noticeable. Friends introduced her to suitors, businessmen, professionals, men who could provide for her. Mayme refused them all. "I had the love of my life," she told a friend years later. "You don't get that twice. I'm not interested in settling for less." From 1968 until her death in 2009, Mayme remained single. She never dated, never remarried, never considered it. She wore her wedding ring until the day she died and kept Bumpy's photograph on her nightstand, speaking to it every morning. "Good morning, Bumpy, I miss you." Those who knew Mayme in her later years described her routine. Every morning around 7 a.m., she made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with Bumpy's photograph, and said, "Good morning, husband. I hope you're watching over us today." She told him about her plans, family news, and events in Harlem, as if he were still there, still listening. "People thought I was crazy," Mayme admitted once, talking to a photograph, "but I didn't care. It made me feel close to him." She kept their apartment exactly as it had been when Bumpy was alive: his chair, his books, his chess set all in place. Friends said that if Bumpy walked through the door tomorrow, he would recognize everything. Mayme kept it like a shrine. She spent her widowhood fiercely protecting Bumpy's legacy. When reporters asked about his criminal activities, Mayme didn't deny them, but she always added context. "Yes, Bumpy ran the numbers," she said, "but he also kept the neighborhood safe. He made sure families had food, paid rent for those who couldn't afford it, and sent kids to college. That's the Bumpy I knew." When the media portrayed Bumpy as just another violent gangster, Mayme corrected them. Bumpy was a gentleman, she insisted. He dressed impeccably, spoke eloquently, read constantly, and was smarter than most of the so-called legitimate businessmen I met. Her biggest battle came in 2007, when the film American Gangster was released. The movie portrayed Frank Lucas as Bumpy Johnson's protege, even showing Lucas at Bumpy's deathbed receiving his blessing to take over Harlem. Mayme was 93 when she saw the trailer, and she was furious. "Frank wasn't anything but a flunky," she told reporters. "Bumpy never really trusted him. He was never invited to our house. Frank Lucas is a liar, and I want the world to know it." Mayme gave multiple interviews exposing Frank Lucas's lies. "Frank Lucas never spent a single night in my house," she said. "He was never at the wake. He was never at the funeral. I don't know where he was, but he was not there." Bumpy would say, "You can trust a thief quicker than a liar, because a thief steals money because he needs it, but a liar lies for the hell of it. Frank is a liar. He was never more than a flunky to my husband." At 93, Mayme decided to write her own book, Harlem Godfather, The Rap on My Husband, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. She enlisted author Karen E. Canona Miller to help. For months, Mayme dictated stories, corrected Hollywood's falsehoods, and preserved the truth. The book was published in February 2008. Mayme was 93. Her mission was accomplished. Bumpy's real story was now in print. She died 15 months later, on May 1, 2009. Her last words, according to family, were, "I'm coming. Bumpy, wait for me." Mayme Johnson is buried beside Bumpy at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. Their headstones sit side by side, simple and matching. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, 1905 to 1968. Mayme Johnson, 1914 to 2009. After 41 years apart, they were together again. Today, visitors to Woodlawn Cemetery sometimes leave flowers on both graves, honoring the man and the woman who represented a gangster and his devoted wife, a love that survived prison, poverty, crime, and death. A love that lasted 61 years, 20 together, 41 apart, but always together in Mayme's heart. Bumpy Johnson had two daughters, Ruthie and Elise. Ruthie, Bumpy and Mayme's biological daughter, was born in the early 1950s. Elise was Bumpy's daughter from a previous relationship. Her mother's identity is unknown. Mayme raised Elise as her own. Neither daughter lived to see Mayme's memoir published. Both died in 2006, 43 years after losing their father. Ruthie lived entirely in her father's shadow. She avoided the spotlight, stayed private, and never gave interviews or spoke publicly about him. Ruthie's cause of death was never made public, respecting her desire for privacy. She left children, though their names and locations have never been disclosed. Ruthie remains the most mysterious member of the Johnson family, a daughter who chose invisibility over notoriety. Elise Johnson's story is heartbreaking. Born before Bumpy married Mayme, her mother's identity remains uncertain, though some speculate it was Stephanie St. Clair. Mayme raised Elise with love, trying to give her a normal life, but being Bumpy Johnson's daughter came at a cost. Colleges rejected her because of her father's criminal record. Opportunities disappeared. Doors closed. A family friend later said she wanted to do more in life, but her father's history made it difficult. Elise turned to drugs to cope, starting with marijuana and progressing to harder substances. By her 20s, she was addicted, shoplifting to support her habit, and was arrested multiple times. Both Mayme and Bumpy bailed her out. They tried rehab, interventions, nothing worked. In her late 20s or early 30s, Elise had a daughter, Margaret Johnson. She could not care for her. The addiction and chaos were too strong. So Bumpy and Mayme stepped in, raising Margaret as their own. They provided stability, love, and a chance at a better life. Elise struggled for decades, in and out of rehab and jail, battling demons she could never fully overcome. On an unknown date in In 2006, Mayme Johnson died, reportedly from a heart attack linked to long-term substance abuse. She was in her late 50s or early 60s. Her exact age is unknown. She died the same year as her half-sister Ruthie, leaving me devastated. She had already buried her husband. Now she had buried both of his daughters. Only Margaret remained. Margaret Johnson was Elisa's daughter. Born in the 1950s, her biological father is unknown. Because her mother couldn't care for her due to addiction, Margaret was raised by her grandparents, Bumpy and Mayme Johnson. In many ways, Margaret became the daughter they had always hoped. Elise would be. Margaret grew up in Harlem during the 1950s and 60s. In the midst of Bumpy's reign, as the Godfather of Harlem, she lived with Bumpy and Mayme at West 121st Street in a well-furnished apartment filled with books and music. Bumpy treated Margaret like a princess, taking her to get ice cream at the corner store, reading to her at night, and patiently teaching her chess. Bumpy also wanted Margaret to have opportunities he never had. He enrolled her in one of New York's most prestigious private schools, paying the tuition in cash, and made sure she had everything she needed: books, uniforms, and supplies. Mayme Johnson believed in education, and Margaret later said, "He didn't have much formal schooling himself, but he read everything and wanted me to have what he didn't." Margaret was smart, quick with numbers, so Bumpy gave her a job calculating his gambling income from the numbers racket. She earned small amounts dollars here and there, unaware she was helping run an illegal operation. To her, it was just pocket money. To Bumpy, it was a lesson in the value of work. Margaret learned more than math from Bumpy. He taught her street smarts, how to read people, spot danger, and carry herself with dignity. Margaret always looked people in the eye, never looked down, never apologize for who you are. He taught her about loyalty. Your word is your bond. If you promise something, you do it. No excuses. That's how you earn respect. He also taught her about Harlem, walking her through the neighborhood, pointing out landmarks, telling stories, and introducing her to people. "This is Mr. Washington. He owns the barber shop. Good man, honest. This is Mrs. Thompson. She runs the beauty shop. If you ever need help, you go to her." Bumpy showed Margaret who to trust, who to avoid, and how to survive. Margaret also saw Bumpy's generosity. She watched him pay rent for struggling families, organize Thanksgiving turkey giveaways, distribute hundreds of turkeys, break up fights, settle disputes, and keep the peace. "My grandfather wasn't perfect," Margaret said. "He did things I didn't agree with, but he also took care of his people. He made sure Harlem was safe, kids had food, and nobody messed with our neighborhood." One story Margaret loved: a teenage boy in Harlem was being recruited by a gang. Bumpy confronted the gang leader and said 5 words: "Leave the kid alone, now." The gang left. "That's who my grandfather was," Margaret said. "He protected people who couldn't protect themselves." Margaret was in her mid-teens when Bumpy died in July 1968. She wasn't at Wells' restaurant that morning, but she was home when Junie Bird came to deliver the news. Margaret heard her grandmother scream, then collapse, and ran downstairs. Junie was there, tears streaming. "Bumpy's gone, baby, he's gone." Margaret didn't cry at first. She stood frozen, unable to process what she'd heard. Her world had shifted in an instant. Her grandfather, the strongest man she had ever known, was gone. At first, it didn't make sense to Margaret. She cried later at the funeral when she saw the casket. The reality hit her hard. She would never see Bumpy again, never hear his voice, never play chess with him, never receive his guidance. He was gone, and Margaret felt utterly lost. Margaret Johnson would earn her own nickname in Harlem, the Annie Oakley of Harlem. The story behind it is unforgettable. One day in the 1970s, exact date unknown, Margaret was in a wheelchair, recovering from a dislocated hip and a slipped disc. She could barely move, the pain constant. As she wheeled herself down a Harlem street after a doctor's appointment, a young man, desperate and high on drugs, confronted her. "Give me your purse," he demanded. Margaret looked him in the eye. "No," she said. "Give it to me, or I'll hurt you," he insisted. Margaret reached into her purse, but not for money. She pulled out a gun and fired. She didn't kill him, but she incapacitated him long enough for the police to arrive. News of the incident spread like wildfire. Bumpy's granddaughter, wheelchair-bound, yet still fierce and fearless, was not to be trifled with. From that day on, people in Harlem called her Annie Oakley. When Mayme heard the story, she wasn't surprised. "That's Bumpy's granddaughter," she said proudly. She learned from the best. As Margaret grew older, she became one of the primary guardians of Bumpy's legacy. When Mayme wrote Harlem Godfather, Margaret contributed stories and details only family could know. She consulted on TV productions about Bumpy, ensured the facts were accurate, and corrected historical misconceptions. When interviewed, she defended her grandfather's memory. "People think my grandfather was just a gangster," she said, "but he was so much more than that. He was a father, a husband, a protector, a reader, a chess player, a man who cared deeply about his community." Margaret never sugarcoated Bumpy's crimes. She acknowledged them but always provided context. My grandfather did illegal things, she explained, but he lived in a time when black people had very few legal opportunities. The system was rigged against us. He found a way to survive on. He used his power to help others survive. 2. Margaret spent most of her life in Harlem, the neighborhood her grandfather had protected. She had one son, Anthony Johnson, whom she raised with the same values Bumpy had instilled in her: loyalty, dignity, education, and strength. She shared stories of her great-grandfather with Anthony, teaching him about Bumpy's intelligence, generosity, and complexity. Your great-grandfather was a legend, she told him. Never forget where you come from. Anthony eventually moved to London, carrying Bumpy's legacy with him. Margaret Johnson died in 2016 at approximately 66 years old. Her family never disclosed the cause of death, keeping it private. She had outlived her grandfather by 48 years, her grandmother by 7, and her mother, Elise, by 10. Yet the Johnson family line continued through her son. Anthony Margaret was buried in New York, not at Woodlawn Cemetery with Bumpy and Mayme. Their plots were full but nearby, close enough for the family to visit all 3 graves in one trip. At her funeral, friends and family remembered her strength, loyalty, and tireless protection of Bumpy's memory. One friend said, if you said something wrong about Bumpy, she'd correct you immediately. She didn't care who you were. That was Margaret, the Annie Oakley of Harlem. Tough until the very end. When Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, his net worth was estimated between $8 million and $100 million, though the most commonly cited figure is $50 million, equivalent to $400. $440 million in 2026. But there was a complication. Bumpy's wealth came from illegal operations, primarily the numbers racket. Bumpy's wealth came from a mix of sources: numbers, rackets, gambling, protection schemes, and alleged drug operations, though Mayme denied the latter. There were no tax returns, no official records, no paper trail, leaving one big question: where did all that money go? Contrary to popular belief, not all of Bumpy's fortune was illicit. Multiple sources confirmed that he invested heavily in legitimate businesses, real estate, and properties across Harlem, New York City, and Los Angeles. He owned residential apartments, commercial buildings, hotels, and even slum tenements, which he sometimes used to house poor families for little or no rent. Bumpy also invested in financial instruments, bonds, investment accounts, and stocks. He had connections on Wall Street who helped him secure profitable deals, diversifying his portfolio to protect his wealth. He even launched a record label, contributing to Harlem's vibrant music scene. These legitimate ventures generated income that could be legally passed down. Bumpy Johnson's will was never made public, but family statements and news reports indicate how his fortune was distributed. 1. Mayme inherited the majority. As Bumpy's legal wife, Mayme received most of his estate, including their Harlem home, real estate holdings, legitimate business interests, cash, and investments. She used this inheritance to live comfortably for the rest of her life, eventually moving to Philadelphia. She had enough to support herself without working. 2. Charitable donations. Mayme donated significant portions of Bumpy's wealth to organizations like the NAACP and the Harlem Boys Club, which worked to keep young men out of crime. She believed Bumpy would have wanted his money to benefit the community, and she honored that wish. 3. Family support. Mayme provided financial support to her daughters, Ruthie and Elise. Until their deaths in 2006, she also supported her granddaughter, Margaret, and great-grandson, Anthony, for legal fees and debts. At the time of his death, Bumpy was under federal indictment for drug conspiracy. His estate likely covered substantial legal fees to settle those matters. He also owed debts to associates, creditors, and business partners, all of which had to be paid. 5. Hidden assets. It's possible some of Bumpy's wealth was hidden cash buried. Offshore accounts, assets under aliases. If such assets existed, they were never discovered or claimed. The irony of Bumpy's fortune is striking. He made millions through illegal activities that exploited his own community. Yet he used much of that wealth to protect the same community. He paid rents for families in need, distributed hundreds of turkeys at Thanksgiving, and kept rival gangs in the Italian mafia from taking complete control of Harlem. When he died, Mayme continued this legacy by donating portions of his wealth to organizations supporting black people. In the end, much of Bumpy's money returned to Harlem. As of 2026, the last direct descendant of Bumpy Johnson is Anthony Johnson, Margaret's son, who lives in London, England. Very little is known about him. He has kept an even lower profile than his grandmother. In 2009, when Mayme passed away, Anthony was listed as one of her survivors. He represents the end of the Johnson bloodline. Public records show no children, meaning the direct line from Bumpy Johnson will end with him. The story of Bumpy Johnson's family after his death is one of loss. Bumpy died in 1968. His daughters, Ruthie and Elise, both passed in 2006. His granddaughter, Margaret, died in 2016. His wife, Mayme, Passed in 2009, within 48 years, everyone closest to Bumpy was gone. Only Anthony remains. But one thing survived: the legend. Bumpy Johnson is more famous now than he was in life. TV shows, movies, books, and documentaries keep his story alive. Ice memoir, Harlem Godfather, ensures that Bumpy's real story, not Hollywood's version, is preserved for generations. Preserved, the impact of Bumpy's life continues. His donations to the NAACP and the Harlem Boys Club still help people today. And above all, the love endured. Mayme never stopped loving Bumpy. For 41 years, she remained his wife, wore his ring, spoke his name, and defended his memory. That is the true legacy, not the money, not the power, not the crime, but the love. Asterisk. Bumpy Johnson passed away on July 7, 1968, leaving an estimated fortune of $50 million, equivalent to $440 million today. He left behind his wife, Mayme, and 2 daughters. Mayme never remarried, never dated, and wore her wedding ring for 41 years until her death in 2009. At age 93, she wrote a memoir to preserve Bumpy's legacy and donated significant portions of his wealth to the NAACP and the Harlem Boys Club. Asterisk. Both daughters, Ruthie and Elise, died in 2006. Elise succumbed to a heart attack linked to decades of substance abuse. Bumpy and Mayme's granddaughter, Margaret, whom they had raised, passed away in 2016 at the age of 66. Her son, Anthony Johnson, now lives in London and is the last direct descendant of Bumpy Johnson. Asterisk. The family's story is one of enduring love and profound loss, anchored by a widow who remained Mrs. Bumpy Johnson until the end. If this story moved you, subscribe for more tales where loyalty and love persist beyond death. See you in the next story.